Something that's guaranteed to make both adults and children smile is the sight of a rainbow cake. Here's how to make one. If you're going to go to all the trouble of making a rainbow cake, it only makes sense to make it taste as good as possible. I have found, and I know a lot of people aren't going to like this, that the best tasting vanilla cake I can make, and I've made many from scratch, is using Betty Crocker's Golden Vanilla Mix with some alterations. First, instead of oil, I use squeezed parquet, and instead of water, I use whole milk. These two things greatly elevate the quality of the texture and the flavor of the resulting cake. Portion size is very important in making a rainbow cake because you want each layer to be the same thickness. I found the most accurate way to do that is to make each batch separately and to weigh out the ingredients using a scale. This is much more accurate than using a volume measure system, such as cups and tablespoons, that sort of thing. So, for a single layer going into a 10-inch aluminum pan, I use 154 grams of the Golden Vanilla Cake Mix, 1 large whole egg, 33 grams of squeezed parquet margarine. I find this tastes better, oddly enough, than even using butter or any other margarine. The squeezed parquet by itself doesn't taste particularly good, but for some reason it works in the cakes. I add 92 grams of whole milk, and in this case 1/4 teaspoon of Wilton Violet Gel food color. The violet, when you add this much, actually comes out a very deep royal purple. Works very good. Because of the emulsifiers and other wetting agents that are put into the cake mixes, you don't have to pre-mix anything. Just dump everything into one bowl and mix it up for about a minute, minute and a half, and you're good to go. Mix for 30 seconds on low, then kick it up to high for 1 minute. And that's it. We're ready to pan. Take a 10-inch aluminum pan, line it with parchment paper, and place a well-soaked Wilton baking strip around the outside. This slows down the baking of the edge and helps the cake rise flatter. Pour the batter in a ring so that it doesn't get concentrated in the center too much. Use a soft spurtle to make sure you get all of the batter out. If you try to spread the batter, because the parchment paper isn't attached to the pan, you're likely to pull it around. So instead of spreading it, kind of shake the spurtle to tease it towards the edges. And that's it. Okay, now, no matter how carefully you try to smooth this, you're always going to end up with high spots and low spots, which will reflect through after the cake is baked into having an uneven surface. One way to get rid of those is to slam the cake. Just pick it up and drop it down. This shakes things up and settles the cake. It also pops a lot of the larger bubbles, which when you put the cake into the oven can form into large voids. Now, once you've got it pretty level, you still have another problem. You put this in the oven and the center will cook faster than the edges, with the result that the center rises more and you get a crown. Most recipes for rainbow cakes call for using something to cut that crown off. Once you do that, you lose the skin that forms on the cake as it bakes, and frosting becomes a crumb nightmare. What I prefer to do is to make sure that the cake bakes levelly so that you don't have to cut the crown off. All you have to do is spin the cake a few times, and what this does is it forces the surface of the batter into a slightly concave shape so that when the center rises more, it ends up being level. And that's it. All that's needed to be done is put it in the oven, 350 degrees, and because it's such a thin layer, it'll bake in just 9 or 10 minutes. Okay, 10 minutes have gone by, and as you can see, the cake came out beautifully level, no trimming required at all. Remove the baking strip so it cools faster, and let it air cool until it's, frosting temperature. Because each layer is so thin, it's very delicate. Also, this cake is incredibly moist, which also makes it delicate. To depan, what I like to do is take a cake rack and lightly spray it with non-stick oil, invert the cake on it, and then remove the parchment paper. Place the cake rack on it, invert it again, and because I've sprayed this with non-stick oil, what happens is that this will peel off very easily and not break the surface. Once this is air dry a little bit more, it'll be able to be frosted and not tear up so easily. A great cake demands a great frosting. The best frosting I've ever been able to make isn't homemade from scratch, but rather it takes 1 tub, 16 ounces, of Duncan Hines classic vanilla frosting, beaten with 1 stick of salted butter. This has a better texture and a much better flavor than any frosting I've ever found, either purchased or homemade. The butter and its saltiness mellows out the pure sweetness of the Duncan Hines frosting and makes it something really great. Give this a try. I think you'll like it. Here are the finished cakes. Before I start assembling them, I'd like to go over a couple of points about why I bake them the way I do. First, it's much easier, and you can find many YouTube videos of doing it this way, where you just pour the batter in order into a pan and bake it all at once. The problem with that is that where the 2 different colors meet, there is unavoidably some mixing, and it results usually in a muddy look or a brownish or a blackish layer, which is very unattractive. If you bake them separately, the layer of white frosting between them heightens the colors. While you can bake 2 and even 4 layers at a time in an oven, I avoid doing that because where 2 pans are close to each other, this one will tend to make this one a little cooler on this side. This one will tend to make this one a little cooler on this side. They won't rise as much, and you'll almost always get a wedge-shaped layer. If they come out, and this sometimes can happen, where they are a little unlevel, you have a couple of options. First of all, the easiest thing to do is if the amount of wedge is very small or there's just a small depression, you can fill it with frosting, no problem. Another thing you can do if there's an area that's a little high is after the cake is cooled, just press it down lightly and you can get rid of a lot of the bumps that way. Finally, if you have two layers that are wedged the same way, let's say this one slopes down so this side is low, and this one slopes down so that this side is low. If you put the low side of this one on the high side of this one, the slopes will average out, and you'll end up with a cake that is very level. If you do my method, where you bake each one separately, where you get a much more even bake, don't worry about the cakes drying out. This is a very moist cake, and it can take sitting on the counter for a good 2 or 3 hours before you run into any problems. To assemble, put your purple layer down first, and put a thin layer of your frosting on it. The motion you want to use to avoid tearing the surface is to press down and push the frosting into the cake as much as you're pushing it around the cake. Once you've got an even layer of frosting on the first layer, making sure to fill any depressions that might exist, take the blue layer and lay it centered on the purple layer. Continue this with each layer, going green, yellow, orange, and red, and then finish with a top coat of frosting on the top and sides, and you're done. Between its large size and the fact that it has 6 layers in it, this cake took 4 tubs of the frosting mixed with 4 sticks of butter. That's a lot of frosting. So cut the slices thin, or if you're serving it to children, you're really going to give them a sugar high. And there we have it. If after stacking the layers you find out that some have shrunk more than others in diameter, what I recommend doing, if you want a real straight side, is to place the cake in the freezer for half an hour to an hour to firm up the outside, then using a very sharp serrated knife, trim the sides even. Put it back in the refrigerator for another half hour to firm up again. Then bring it out, use a pastry brush to brush off any crumbs, and then put a crumb coat on, freeze some more, and then put your final finish coat on. This way you'll end up with a much more perpendicular cake. It'll look better. As a rule, I do not put any decorations on rainbow cakes. And the reason is that the main surprise is the burst of color when you cut a piece out and remove it for the first time. Any decorating, even white frosting piping around the edges, is going to draw the eye away from that, the brilliant colors inside the cake. So let's take a cut and see how it came out. And there you have it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy this, and I hope you'll enjoy the cake.